Hello and welcome to the Churchill Club's 19th annual Top 10 Tech Trends Debate, where 5 visionary venture capitalists go out on a limb and predict important new trends, and then you vote and select the top trend of them all. Many people contributed to make this all happen, and it's always a community affair. First, we wish to thank our co-presenter, Forbes, and congratulate them on the 16th annual Midas list of the 100 top venture capitalists. Our platinum sponsor is Accenture, and we cannot thank them enough for their support of this event and their numerous generous contributions over the years. Our silver sponsors are Luxembourg Trade and Investment, Ness Digital Engineering, and RBC Capital Markets. Thank you. Also wish to thank Mr. Chris Stedman of Silicon Valley Bank and also on the Churchill Club Board of Directors for his help in putting the program together. And another thanks, a big one, to Pamela Davis Kivelson, the Churchill Club Artist in Residence, and her amazing drawing orchestra, including Shaunak Kyer, Angel Ortiz, and Jessica Sun. For this project, the team photographed and recorded interviews with the speakers and then fed the material into an artificial intelligence agent. The result is 5 magnificent, large-scale paintings of our speakers. These are images in digital screens of those paintings, and those are by Pam, and then 5 poems that were written about each speaker by the AI. You can check out those images and the poetry in your programs, but I'd like to also share with you a short video to see more of the artist's process. So if you could turn your attention to the screen, please.
My work, particularly in painting, captures the emotional subtext of events as they unfold in the moment. I want to reveal the unconscious, uncontrolled dynamics, gestures, and subtle expressions that we feel but do not see. These large-scale oil paintings try to portray some of the facial expressions these individuals show when listening, reflecting, and judging. The background colors allude to things that the subjects find fascinating, for example, the ocean, meteorites, and puzzles. The accompanying text on the painting is generated by an artificial intelligence platform called Pam AI, which was created with Shaunak Kyer, the CEO of Emma AI. I had the impression during the interviews that, in a sense, these VCs were working on this big canvas with all sorts of conflicting variables and facing unknowns, which is not that different from making a painting. Art that is augmented by AI can reveal things that we are influenced by but don't necessarily notice.
Thank you, Pam, and the Drawing Orchestra. We hope everyone enjoys. This year's winning trend wizard, chosen by you, will receive a custom-created magical wizard wand. That is all I will say for now. You will see the pictures in the actual wand, of course, later on. One final thank you and an introduction. Our polling partner, Poll Everywhere, is contributing their phone-based service to collect your votes on the top 10 trends. Your votes will determine the winning trend, of course, so we want to have your full participation. I'd like to bring up Kelly Arbuckle of Poll Everywhere, who will walk us through the process. Come on up, Kelly.
Thanks, Karen. It is such a privilege to be here with you tonight and partnering with the Churchill Club in tonight's exciting event. As you all know, as we all know, the Churchill Club has long been igniting the conversation about technology and the future. Poll Everywhere is absolutely thrilled to provide the platform that's going to allow all of you to participate in tonight's conversation. So as Karen mentioned, you're going to be asked to vote on all of the trends that are discussed tonight using your phone, using one of these. So let's do a practice round together. If everyone could pull out their phone. It's no longer a faux pas at an event like tonight. So go ahead and open up a web browser. I'm going to do the same with you. Go to pollev.com/top10. Wow, you guys are really fast. And answer the question, would you rather be lucky or smart? And that's it. That's as easy as it is. So as we go through the trends, you'll be asked to vote on your phone like this. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you very much, Kelly. Let's give a warm welcome now to John Walsh, Senior Managing Director at Accenture and Chairman Emeritus of the Churchill Club Board of Directors. John.
All right. Thank you, Karen. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the 19th Annual Top 10 Tech Trends Debate. My name is John Walsh. I'm a Senior Managing Director at Accenture. I'm also a board member on the Churchill Club. You know, I've had the unique opportunity to participate with the Churchill Club over the course of the past 10 years, putting on exciting events just like this one this evening that brings together numerous industry legends and leaders. Tonight is a perfect example of the experiences and leading insights that the Churchill Club is known for around the Valley and by Valley Watchers around the world. It's a testament to the power of bringing together talented and creative people to explore new opportunities around innovation, economic growth, and social good. Many of Silicon Valley's best and brightest leaders are with us this evening. So, tonight is a unique event. It's really up to us to actually listen to the debates and to the presentations by the VCs and vote on who we think has the top 10 investable trends. Why don't I go ahead and get things rolling by introducing our panelists and inviting them up to the stage. So first, former VP at Twitter and general partner at Kleiner Perkins since 2011, Mr. Mike Abbott. There he is. Okay, next, top 10 tech trends debate veteran and multi-year champion, the most interesting man in Silicon Valley, Steve Jurvetson. Steve. Good to see you. Returning for the third time to the program, Canvas Ventures co-founder and general partner, Rebecca Lynn. Next, former Pinterest product manager and Benchmark general partner, Sarah Tavel.
I know, it's him. It's all him.
Okay, and our last panelist, returning top 10 tech trends panelist and GGV Capital general partner, Hans Tung. Hans. Okay, so there are our panelists. Now let's introduce our MCs for the evening. First, Mike Perlis is the first non-family member and president and CEO of Forbes Media. After having spent 10 years at SoftBank Capital, where he invested in content, tech, and mobile businesses, he is still a recovering venture capitalist. Mike. Second, we have Quentin Hardy. Quentin Hardy, who has gone in the opposite direction. After many years as a distinguished journalist, including as a national editor for Forbes magazine, he is now the head of editorial at Google Cloud. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike and Quentin, and we'll start the evening. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, we're almost ready to get started. I'd like to add my welcome to Karen's and to John's. Welcome, panelists. Welcome to all of you. There are a little more than 500 people here. It really inspires me that this event draws this kind of a crowd year in, year out. There are very few kinds of events like this that can bring this kind of smarts, this kind of accomplishment together in one room on a Wednesday night down here at the Hyatt. This is the 19th year. The panel is extraordinary. Their predictions are way worth listening to. There may be, a Twitter or a Tesla or a Pinterest or a Grubhub or a lending club buried in here. These are very accomplished VCs. It's also your opportunity to let them pitch you. and let you have the opportunity to say yes or no, or I agree, or I disagree. And I know you're going to take great advantage of that and enjoy it. Thrilled to have Quentin here. He's a former colleague, and what he's doing at Google is very interesting and a topic for another time. But journalism is redefining itself, and Quentin is on the tip of that spear. So, Quentin, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you all for coming. This is a fantastic turnout. I know you're here because you want a window in how these people think, how they see the world. You know they're competitive people. You know in many cases they're making investments now in these areas. They're seeing this and seeing it through. I got to tell you, if you thought they were competitive, I've talked to them. When it comes to the wand, they're really competitive. So that's going to be great. It's about the wand, and that's what we're here for, and here's how it's going to work. Each of our speakers are prepared to deliver 2 trends based on the following criteria. 1, they are not obvious today, but they may well be in the future. And 2, we may well see explosive impact from these areas in about 5 years' time. Mike?
Here's how it's going to play out. Quentin and I will give a brief description of the trends one by one. Then the owner of the trend will have 2.5 minutes to persuade everybody in the room that this is her trend and the top 10 trend this year. The panel then will vote. They'll express their opinion by holding their paddle, red disagreeing and green agreeing with the trend. And I'd ask the panelists, it's a big room and there are a lot of people here, when you put your paddle up, put it up high and proud so that everybody can see it. Then the panel will have the opportunity over about 5 minutes, about a minute each, to explain why they agreed or disagreed with the trend. And then the speaker will get the opportunity for a minute of rebuttal. And then the audience will vote, and we'll see where we end up. So pundits, one of you will win that magical wizard wand at the end of the evening. Good luck. Let's dive in. And Quentin, can you take it away?
All right, well, let's start with my friend Mike Abbott, who sees a way to solve a problem everyone agrees needs solving, but no one has been able to lick yet, and that is education. Redefining education from the how to the what. As Mike sees it, the ability to consume educational content via different channels will stretch how children learn, and they will learn in new ways. There will be access to virtual travel, global historical sites, and novel experiences. Traditional educational endeavors, the IQ, will happen virtually and online, while the importance of emotional intelligence, or EQ, collaborative endeavors, will be the primary focus of development through physical interaction. Mike, go.
Sure. So in terms of actually education and how it's reaching the masses, there's been a lot of democratization just in the last couple of years through platforms like Coursera and Udacity. And that's really enabled, again, globally, access to this information and allowed all of us actually to continue to learn in a meaningful way, either be young or old. One of the things that's recently started to emerge that I think is going to come over the next 5 years is the use of technologies like virtual reality to now democratize the ability for children to actually experience visiting various key sites globally, whether it be the streets of Tokyo or some of the 7 wonders of the world. And so I think that's one aspect that education is going to change radically at a global level, that it's actually going to help not just the kids in the U.S., but worldwide. The second, I think, is incredibly important to think about, and that is, as artificial intelligence becomes a part of all of our lives over the next decade, there's going to be, obviously, various transitions in jobs, but one of the things that can become increasingly important is not necessarily the human-to-computer interaction, but the human-to-human interaction. And so I think that there's going to be an increased, let's say, education around how can you help the social interaction between 2 humans, and actually looking at measuring EQ in more meaningful ways and actually really teaching that way. So a university, you can imagine, a predominant amount of the content, we'll say at the IQ level, will be delivered through these online experiences or through VR, but we're still going to require that human-to-human interaction, and that's going to be the primary, I think, driver for children of the future actually to go to universities. So there's actually a balance of how do we contribute into this world that's going to have so much augmented intelligence.
All right. So, and now the presenters will vote with their paddles and comment down the line.
So do you...
Which goes first?
We have to raise our paddles, right?
Raise your paddles.
All together, raise your
Are
paddles.
we green or are we red?
Raise them high, you guys.
Oh, we're kind of red. Are you
That's
red,
good.
Hans?
Half.
Half and half.
Half.
Okay.
I forgot the half.
Two predictions.
All right.
Half.
Who wants to go first with some pushback?
Well, you had me until VR.
I started with VR.
Well,
You lost so early.
I started when I said end.
Well,
I totally, with this description as it's written, amen. I agree with you, but VR being ubiquitous part of this in the next 5 years, that's where you lose me.
Actually, I got lost at the headline because I think it's the opposite. I think it's going from the what to the how in the post-Google era, where what you know isn't as important as lifelong learning and how you learn. And I think that's what education increasingly will be about, starting that spark. I also agree VR is not part of it. And I do agree that emotional EQ will be an important skill in an AI future. I totally agree with that. It's just not clear to me from hearing the description of this in general why education gets better, what particular technologies. I don't think it's AR. I think the flipped classroom idea was started by Khan Academy and others that sort of rippled through a variety of schools that you already see this underway. And so I think over the next 5 years, and unfortunately, because I want this to radically change in 5 years, I think the inertia around regulated education systems and teachers' unions, what have you, will mean things don't change as fast as they do in other tech industries. I think education at home will change, and I think much of this is partially true, but generally, I think you got the title backwards.
Rebecca?
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add to that. I think that the main challenge with education is what there's stratified education. It's going to be like public and private healthcare, right? Or public and private schools. And what we've seen is that with our own kids is that really teaching them to how to go out. It doesn't matter what the forum or the medium is. They can go and search out education online, and the real thing for them is to teach them how to start that search, right? And the format doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's AI or VR or whatever, but it's to get them to have the confidence and be stood up to where they figure out how to go ask those questions, how to find the information, no matter where that might be. And honestly, we've basically done a homeschooling program with our daughter, and we're discovering that we can pretty much knock out all of education in 2 hours a day that she's currently getting in public school. And it's unbelievable. And it's largely because of what is available online. So then you're asking yourself, like, what else is there for the kids? Like, what else can they learn in those other hours a day? And it's pretty phenomenal, just the resources that are available to us to teach her. Whether it's a foreign language or she's a fifth grader and she's like, I want to learn genetics. And we said, fabulous, let's go find something that, you can sink your teeth into. So I don't disagree that we're going to have a lot more at our disposal to teach children. I think what I disagree with is that I think it really is about how to get that knowledge. And then I don't think the chalkboard worked fine, for a very long time. It's really a question of how do they go out and seek that knowledge out for themselves.
Okay, and Hans, you gave him a half agree,
right.
So
I'm just surprised with the response from other panelists. I thought AR, VR would definitely be part of where education will be in the future. I mean, you don't have that. You'll be constrained by the geographies where you are. And how are you going to see what India, China, Africa, Latin America is like if you cannot go there, every summer? So having VR or AR be part of that, to me, makes total sense. How will it be done? I don't know, but I think that direction definitely makes sense. So that's half of the yes. The other half is that I do think that physical interaction is important to teach emotional intelligence, for sure. But I think just given how you see the proliferation of live video everywhere now, and kids spend so much time watching YouTube and other things, it doesn't take rocket science to figure out that live video will be some part of a way for you to figure out how to interact with people around the world too. So I think it's going to be beyond physical interaction, but live video will play a huge part. We saw that in China already, and I think it's a matter of time that you'll see that everywhere else.
All right. Well, Mike, now you know how it feels when they pitch to you.
No, first of all, I actually love there's so much challenge, because if it was obvious, it would definitely not happen. I mean, that's one thing we actually do know. And I think that it's easy in this valley for us to kind of operate around education in really an echo chamber. The reality is that there are many kids that don't go to private schools and don't actually have access to the content we have here. And so I can appreciate, yes, there's different channels that kids learn. Some learn through experiential, some through listen through just content in documents or academic papers. But the reality is you go across the United States and you go globally, they don't have access to the things that we have. And that's why I feel very strongly that technologies like VR can actually start democratizing that access. And we'll see how pervasive that be. I don't necessarily know if it's ubiquitous, but I do think that there's actually kids that are going to access the content, let's say in rural Kansas, that otherwise would never get actually access to that. And in terms of on the EQ, the comment with online video interaction, I see that with my daughter all the time with things like Musical.ly. But I also know how important it is for her to interact with her players on her soccer team to deal with conflict.
Yeah, that both.
Right?
Yep.
Okay, so tech democratizes access. Amazing resources are offered to young children, young people. They acquire emotional intelligence they never had before, prepared for the future. Audience, it's time to vote, and I want everybody on their phones. Lots of participation. So, first choice, Mike Abbott.
That means I should absolutely be investing in this.
Disagree? Well,
Jurvetson's the one to beat.
I love it when the later votes sort of have that come from behind thing. We had that first one, too. All right.
Come on, education.
Okay.
Okay, well, if Mike was looking for a vote against,
A third of the room is with you, Mike.
Awesome. That's the way it's been my whole
Look
life.
at
I'll
one.
go with it.
Look at one. Look right. Look left. One of them's on your side.
Yeah, there you go.
That's awesome.
I have no problem being
The other
underdog.
two, not so much. All right, let's move
okay,
along. then.
time to move to trend number 2. Steve Jurvetson, the revival of voice. The multi-touch screen UI finally cracked the code for smartphones. Major breakthroughs in voice will vastly broaden the compute fabric of the world. Steve, over to you.
Thank you. This, I think, is a big thing that could affect a lot of people, certainly the fabric of society and how we think of computers, much like the smartphone did to its predecessors. We gained some perspective on voice from our investments in Skype and Twilio and Tellme, but what I'm talking about today is something entirely different, a renaissance, if you will, in the use of voice as a user interface in our everyday life. And if you have an Alexa or Google at home product, you might know roughly what I'm talking about. And for those who've only experienced Siri and the other false starts we've had in voice recognition, believe me, it's getting a lot better. And let me tell you why. The compute's gotten a lot better, the data for training sets have got a lot better, and the use of deep learning in the background to make this all work and make it human-like is making a huge improvement. There's also some new chips by companies like Vesper and Mythic that basically make it a near zero power thing that you could layer onto anything, into a Fitbit, into a Roomba, into any appliance in your home for roughly 40 cents of cost. So you could have an always-on ambient listening thing that could respond to your voice and only your voice and do what you want it to do. Again, think of something the size of a chip, chip the size of your button on your shirt that could do all this in the near future. Right now, speech recognition has an error rate of about 5%, the same as a human, interestingly, and just a few years ago in 2013, that error rate was 23%. So that's probably your experience. Most of the time it gets something wrong in the sentence you're trying to tell it. So we're stuck to like short commands and things like that today. But it is already the case, according to a recent study out of Stanford, that we can speak as a user interface input 3 times faster than we can type and 5 times faster than if you're using a glass keyboard. It's just a better way to speak, especially for rapid speakers like myself. And if you look at Alexa, you get a peek into that future. Alexa's in 10% of homes today. And today, literally today, compared to a year ago, it's grown 500%. They have partners throughout Whirlpool, GE, light bulbs all over the place to bring Alexa everywhere. And you have Apple and Facebook entering later this year with their comparable products. So what's next? From interactive voice response, you're going to go to continuous, persistent communication, where it knows you and knows what you want and the context. That requires memory within the deep learning networks. That's what a lot of the research is focused on. And in the next 2 to 5 years, all that will bear fruit. These things will be battery-powered. You won't even need an internet connectivity. And you'll have this long march from the keyboard to the mouse to the touchscreen to voice as the ideal user interface, the thing that is most natural and feels like you don't even notice the technology is there. And if that wasn't compelling enough, think about the rest of the world. Globally, the majority of people will not be using the screens that we're so stuck in because they're either children, they're illiterate, or they're too old to use that user interface. So actually, for the majority of the world and the developing world, as they get online medical care and education, it's going to be by voice.
Wow. Look at that timing. Incredible.
Hey, don't bias the audience.
Paddles up.
Don't
That was
bias
just timing. I just meant I spoke quickly.
Okay, panel, let's vote. For or against? Please hold them high so everyone can see.
Between. Kind of in between.
So we've got 3, 4,
3.5.
and 1 halfway. So who'd like to
I'll go first.
comment first?
I think a lot of this is evident today. But I think it's actually less about voice versus actually new interactions with computers. If you go back 15 years ago, the average search query in Google was 3 terms. If you go back 5 years, it was 5 terms, and right now it's projected to be 9 to 11 terms by 2019. That's important because in the average conversation with a human, it's 9 to 11 words. So I think it's actually about conversation, and that conversation could be through voice, but it may be through other mediums. I know if you look at the amount of voice minutes across various carriers in the U.S., it's actually decreasing. I think if we look at millennials or even the lower generation, I know speaking about my daughter again, they don't want to actually talk to each other. It's not a smartphone, it's a smart camera. And so I guess to me the trend is right in the sense that we're going through a new user interface, but it's not necessarily clear that necessarily voice will be the only interaction because the data is overwhelming against that.
I would argue obviousness to some extent. So if you have anyone in your house below the age of 5 and you have an Alexa, everything happened. It's unbelievable. It was like an overnight light switch that happened in our house to help with homework, what's the weather, what's happening. I mean, it's unbelievable what you go to Alexa for. But I would argue this is already happening. And so in terms of a future trend, I don't know if it's like a 5-year out trend because we ended up from one Alexa in the kitchen to an Echo or an Alexa in every single room in the house like that.
Yep.
And that's now our alarm clock.
Yep.
It's the whole shooting match, right? And it was almost overnight.
Yeah, I mean, I was halfway because I believe in the trend, but raise your hand if you have an Alexa. I mean, everybody
Actually,
has
well,
an Alexa right
Well,
now.
not everybody.
Like my
about
dad, who can
20%.
barely use a computer and doesn't know how to turn his iPhone off, loves the Alexa because he can just talk to it. So I just think it's the first rule of Fight Club, which is not obvious yet.
Good one. You win.
Told you they were competitive.
I'm just here to trash talk.
Exactly.
Don't listen to my trend.
Exactly.
Mike mentioned Musically earlier. We're invested in it. I'm on the board. So we see teenagers, growing up using live video. But like the other panelists have said, if you're below 5 years old now, you're growing up with Alexa, you're growing up with Echo. So it's just going to be, it was so obvious to us who have that at home. It's like, oh my God, this is the next UI that will be dominant for the next generation. It may not be as obvious to people who don't have that, but for those who do, it is going to happen just like that. And with broadband penetration happening across the world, I think this is just going to be quite obvious in the next 2 or 3 years.
Okay. Steve?
Sure. So I think you've heard 2 competing arguments. It's either super obvious or teens are never going to do it. So on the first one, I think it's a difference between how teens want to communicate and the user interface. So they may currently shift to other modes, like I'd rather text than talk to someone. I'm the same, frankly, a lot of the time. But it doesn't mean I wouldn't like to just tell my Roomba, no, stop, go over there, go recharge, and not have to reach over, bend down, touch a button. So there's the proliferation of new things where we currently don't have a user interface that I think is what it's about, the UI, not how we communicate with other humans. The point about it being obvious that I heard through a number of people and got it in the kitchen, and I estimated between 20 and 25% of the room have one already. Well, this is a first world problem, right? I mean, we shouldn't imagine that the rest of the world and the developing world, have what we have. And I think it's an indication sometimes that you see the cutting edge of technology enthusiasts like ourselves falling in love with something. So when we hear people say, it's amazing, my kids love it, it's changed something in our household, that's the clue. This is a big thing that's crashing on our shores. That's why I think we're seeing the signs of it now, per the instructions, yet over the next 5 years, it's going to have an explosive impact on our lives.
So it's time to vote.
Mike, before you vote, this
Sure.
Alexa thing you keep talking about, is that anything like Google Home?
Yeah, that's exactly. Touche.
Go ahead.
Kind of similar.
Well,
Just trying to keep everybody on the same page here.
Proof that it's important.
Thank you.
Quentin, I have
there you
both.
go. That's
Google
good.
Home scared me.
Thank you. Better?
I called Google Home
The one with the better AI, you mean? Oh, yeah.
I called Google Home. Instead of saying, okay, Google, I said Siri by mistake. And it responded that it didn't know Siri, but it had heard good things about her. Scared me. Okay, it's time to vote. Is the revival of voice, here we go, revival of voice, about communication. Is it obvious? Looks like Die is cast.
Well, that's a strong start.
Okay.
Well, it's amazing how quickly these polls take shape.
They really
Yeah.
do.
Now, this is
Okay, Quentin, it's
Wow.
time for trend number
That.
3.
okay. This seems like a big deal. Preventing massive plague.
Kind of a big deal.
Huge, huge, huge.
For those of you in the room who already have the plague, keep it to yourselves. So last year, 2 million people in the U.S. were infected with antibiotic-resistant bacteria. That's a big number. It's growing. In the next 5 years, people are going to come at this problem like never before. We're going to see a rise in microbiome engineering to create therapies to fight antibiotic resistance and save lives. This is potentially, I guess you'd say, Rebecca, a trend on the order of the invention of antibiotics in the first place?
Exactly. Thank you for that. So the Black Plague killed a third of the entire European population. And we haven't had to worry about that in our lifetime because we've had this lovely thing called antibiotics. But antibiotic resistance is on the rise, as I'm sure you all have heard. Last year alone, over 2 million people were infected with antibiotic bacteria in the U.S. And there have been cases with patients who have been resistant to all 26 antibiotics that we currently have. That's the entire U.S. arsenal of antibiotics. And earlier this year, a Nevada woman made the news because she passed away because she had a bacteria that was indeed resistant to all 26 antibiotics. And by the end of this year, over 70,000 people will have an antibiotic resistance bacteria, not to all 26, hopefully, but resistant to the antibiotics we currently have. Now, the issue here is that bacteria adapt quickly, far faster than we can develop drugs. It takes about 10 years to get a drug through the FDA and 1 year for a bacteria to develop resistance. Did you already show the video?
No. Did you have a video to go with it?
Yeah, there was a video that was supposed to go now. But it's okay. It did? Okay. So that video showed the bacteria, which were the white cells, moving in, and the black is the medium, and the medium actually has antibiotics on it. And the concentration of the antibiotics is less on the outside and greater towards the middle. So what you're seeing is the bacteria proliferate, but they hit a wall where they hit like a higher level of antibiotic resistance, but they only hit a wall for a short period of time. And then they develop this antibiotic-resistant strain, and they continue to move through the medium. Now, this happened in 11 days. This is sped up to 56 seconds, but this is 11 days, and a bacteria actually develops resistance to antibiotics. So it's pretty frightening. In addition to death, bacteria is going to change how we operate, literally. Elective surgeries will stop. Hollywood's going to look very different after that happens. And things that we just perceive as commonplace, like tonsillectomies, wisdom teeth removal, ACL repair, are going to be life and death choices that we make. The good news is that I do predict that in the next 5 years, we will have the solution to ward off the next potential plague. There are 3 promising areas of research. The first is the microbiome. I've long said that the microbiome is the penicillin of our generation, and fecal transplants, as gross as that might sound, have already shown to cure about 98% of all C. diff infections that they're applied to. Phages, bacteriophages, are viruses that kill specific strains of bacteria, and these have been effective at treating patients that have come down with antibiotic-resistant infections. And this is the ultimate in personalized medicine that we hear about because each one requires a special phage cocktail. So in sum, I predict in the next 5 years, advances in the microbiome and in phage science are going to actually help us combat antibiotic resistance that we hear about.
Time.
And help us prevent the plague.
She had to close with that. Okay, panelists. So raise your paddles, but think of them as little death scythes. Are we red? Are we great? Okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Jurvetson, he's okay with the plague.
Well, actually, I'm sort of like
in the middle.
Yeah, because there's some I agree with.
Okay.
Fuzziness there.
Okay,
like
so
indeterminate.
Yeah.
Okay, this plague has an upside, is what you're telling me.
The great culling.
Go ahead, Mike. What do you see?
I think we have to look at what's the root cause of the resistance beyond the physiological immune response that's actually creating this, and that is the over-prescription of antibiotics by doctors. I think we are in a culture right now where parents complain about their children. The doctor actually wants to appease the parent, what does he or she do? They prescribe antibiotics. See this all the time. And I think that is certainly both driven, not obviously the physiological cause, but accelerated the resistance in some of these areas. The second, while being a big fan, and I actually agree with some of the advances in microbiome, is that if you look at the cellular models today that we test against within the microbiome, we just do not understand necessarily how things necessarily work within our microbiome, but we do apply these weapons of mass destruction antibiotics, and we know they clear out everything in our system versus, let's say, making attempts to garden that. And that's where I do certainly agree with moving into more of how do we do the gardening approach, frankly, which is even different than doing a fecal transplant and just replacing your microbiome entirely.
Okay.
The poo shove. Yep.
Yeah, push. Or pill.
Steve.
Yeah, sure. So I think it is an important problem. By the way, it's a really big problem. 30% of people in the developing world die because of bacterial infection. So it's a big, hairy problem, and there are a lot of people working on it, as Rebecca mentioned, with a variety of approaches. The worry I have is this 5-year horizon. I mean, she herself mentioned it takes 10 years to get FDA approval. So I, for one, have learned to get really humble about these credible breakthroughs in the lab that aren't yet in the FDA cycle. And in fact, the ones that were the farthest along, like Ceres, public company doing exactly this, it just failed clinical trials. And so there really isn't a contender, I don't think, in a 5-year time frame, even though it'd be great if someone could do this. The other thing is this is a really hard ecology problem. And in other words, it's not just like understanding one cell or one organism. It's a whole microcosm of organisms that you're trying to affect. And that is a very complex thing indeed. In fact, the phage therapy that she mentioned, and I'm on the board of a company that does this, it's complicated. It's really hard. These are the viruses that kill bacteria, by the way, and it's kind of amazing that every day, half of the bacteria on Earth are killed by phage. Naturally. This evolutionary dance is well evolved. They've gone like way down this pathway beyond what our scientists are figuring out in terms of directed phage. So I believe in these therapies. We've invested in at least 2 of them. I just don't think it's going to make a meaningful dent in the next 5 years versus preventing the use of antibiotics in the first place.
Sarah.
I don't actually have anything to add on this one. I agree. I think that this is just a really important area of focus. As you'll see with one of my trends, I actually think that this is a subset of something that I believe in. So, amen.
Okay. Pro. Hands.
I think the guys over on the other side are just disagreeing for the sake of disagreeing. I think this is
Oh, no, we're not.
I think this is a growing problem, not only in the U.S., but elsewhere as well. We track data in China, and it is a problem. Doctors in China love to give out antibiotics just like that, even worse than here. So it is a big growing problem, and I think that over the next 5 years, we should be able to find something to stem the tide.
We'll find something, but if it's a biologic, a bacteria or a virus that you're giving, that's going to be a long FDA cycle.
So do I get to? Okay.
Oh, yes.
So here's the deal. So I mean, Bill Gates himself has predicted that in the next sort of 5-ish years, we're going to see 33 million people die of a global pandemic that we've never seen before, right? And that can be viral or it can be bacterial. But what has happened under, like, the guy that was treated who went to Egypt and came back with this nasty bacterial infection, was in a coma for 2 months, he got emergency certification under the FDA. So I guarantee if we're in a pandemic situation and we have this hit, that they will expedite this through the FDA in a very rapid fashion. I mean, they got it expedited through the FDA in like a week or something. It was ridiculous because in reality, the Navy and the military has been working on this for a very long time, and that's where they sent the guy. So he was in a coma for 2 months, and they applied phage therapy, and he fully recovered. And so
that's one case. We have an actual crisis.
And we have a crisis. They're going to move
everything.
I mean, it's going to go. You're going to see the military technology kind of come to light very quickly, and they'll move it through very quickly. And so we're also in we're in Second Genome, for example, on the microbiome side of this, that's actually working at specific therapies for problems we have in the microbiome. And while the fecal transplants have been shown to sort of be a broad-based application for a lot of these bacterial infections, they're working on very point solutions for different things that people might have, and it's coming along very nicely. So I think it's got a lot of promise coming forward in the next 5 years.
So the thesis is, in the next 5 years, a planet-devastating, preferably disgusting plague comes along and shrinks the FDA approval from 10 years to 6.
Exactly. Yes.
I'm there. Time to vote.
There you are.
It's great stuff.
That's tighter than I thought.
There we go.
That's great. Oh, excellent.
There you go.
This is good.
We've all had lots of antibiotics given to us, so
this
we
is good.
understand.
think we're settling in there.
Oh, there we go. See?
I think this qualifies as not as obvious. One of the two careers
Rest.
not as obvious.
Yeah.
The
Like
voice
too
was too
obvious. It's, you know.
This one seems right.
There you are.
I'm
Thank
getting
you.
suspicious of stacking the deck here.
Okay. Mike.
I'm just, you know,
Okay.
I'm the rookie
On
here.
to the
I
next.
gotta, like, throw stones a little bit in my glass house. Okay, so
Okay.
go ahead.
Trend number 4. This is Sarah's. A startup with IPO prospects will start as an ICO. Initial coin offerings are like the next Kickstarter, an emerging ecosystem that becomes the springboard of a new wave of startups. In the next 5 years, we'll see a startup whose initial capital was funded entirely by an ICO heralded as the first ICO to IPO. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Great. So everybody, I assume, here knows of Kickstarter, and I'm guessing a lot of you have bought things on Kickstarter. I met that company super early on, and let me tell you, it was a mumble jumble of things that were being sold on Kickstarter. And it was only after a couple years that it kind of tapped into a vein, the vein that we all know it for, which are these great consumer devices that we buy. Like it's known as a place now to launch hardware, like consumer hardware devices. And now, like, people will spend millions of dollars pre-buying something that hasn't hit the market yet. And there are things that will never ship. There are things that end up being scams. But there is the Oculus Rift, there's the Pebble, and there's my Sancerre sous vide, which I recommend. It's an excellent $200 sous vide. And so now imagine that instead of Kickstarter, you have a new ecosystem, a new Kickstarter-like ecosystem, where instead of buying a device, you actually are buying coins or tokens in a new blockchain project. And it may even be a project that you're already a user of. And if the new project is successful, you are successful. And in fact, you being an early believer and an early supporter of the company will help make the project successful, and then you, in turn, successful. And so you have an incentive to see that through and help be part of the community that makes that project into something really big, unlike what happens with the Kickstarter that we have now. And this new concept exists now. It's called an ICO. And basically, the idea is that it's a crowd sale of blockchain tokens to fund the development and operations of a blockchain project. And if you've never heard of it, in the last 12 months, $331 million have been put into these projects. In just 12 months, this has come from basically nothing to a huge funding source. And that doesn't even count some of the venture capital that's starting to go into this space. And there are 3 things that I think are making this happen now. One is that developer attention. I mean, this is as geeky as it gets. And so the developers are going there. That's where the innovation disruption happens. It's a huge technology breakthrough, and there's a lot of capital going into the system. And so just like Kickstarter, it's going to be unclear in the beginning, but they're going to tap into something, and I believe we're going to see some Oculuses that come out of this ecosystem.
Okay. So it's time to vote with our paddles. Agree or disagree?
Uh-oh.
Does that mean, Mike, that we invest in this area?
You must
That's
have
the
the
metric I'm using.
Okay. Let's start at the other end this time, Han.
I like Sarah's idea a lot, but I have to say a but. I'm not sure what happened in the next 5 years. It's just Bitcoin's out there. There's a lot of people who are intrigued in it, and they're likely to fund some of the early innovations. But having seen that company actually grow and become an IPO company in less than 5 years just seems very far out.
So I didn't mean actual IPO, just a prospect for an IPO.
Okay, but still seems very far out.
Okay.
Intrigued, but far out.
I think this is what I classify in the engineers gone wild category.
Ouch.
Sorry. That it's really techy, it's really geeky. I don't see it going mainstream.
That's funny. So, because it directly feeds into when anything happens in Bitcoin, I ask my son because he's been really into this for a while, and sure enough, he's already participated in ICO and flipped the shares post ICO. So they do exist, and I guess here's the problem I have. I don't think Kickstarter as a comparison goal was ever a top 10 tech trend. I don't think it ever really hit the threshold of that's one of the most important things happening in technology. Now, if we were talking about venture finance trends, I think this is pretty interesting. Maybe this starts to threaten the venture business in some way or bring more capital systemically, and which would be a good thing, and I would applaud that. But overall, there's something to be aware of. There's two big problems with ICOs. One is trust, and the other are the smart contracts that implement them. On the trust side, there's already been one company that just ran off with the money because they didn't have a smart contract assigned to it. And that's kind of tough part about this ICO. The other version is to do like Ethereum and the DAO and others have done, which is to have a smart contract attached. But as the DAO discovered, a contractual error is a disaster, and it led to a hard fork of Ethereum and just, nerds run amok. Oh my God, they weren't on Twitter when that happened. That was all the buzz. And so I'm a little leery about institutional trust in the system, so I think the Kickstarter analogy is good, but at the end of the day, if it's just like a democratized Kickstarter, I'm not sure that it would go down in history books as a technology trend as much as a finance trend.
Probably extend some of those comments. Having both created my own coin as well as done mining, I can say that, to your point, Steve, it's easy actually to add in errors and actually break that smart contract. And if you kind of step back and go, why does a company IPO in the first place? Is to raise money. And then in exchange of that money, you're obviously getting some type of equity in the company. And that's effectively what we're describing here as another medium for the trading of some type of equity. I think it's interesting, but I think it's very unlikely to occur.
Mike, what was your coin called?
Edgecoin.
Edgecoin.
And then we actually created another Gemini as a way to be able to incent some of our entrepreneurs to provide referrals of other companies. It's actually quite easy to create your own kind. It's actually not rocket science per se. But I think that's part of the issue too, is that it's so easy to create so many coins. I think what we're going to see is the engineering gone wild, or it's spread all over the world, and actually nothing really actually meaningful happens. Now, I do think underneath that, the blockchain is an interesting technology that enables, as a distributed ledger, interesting applications to be built. But I look at that as very distinct from this description.
All right, Sarah?
All right, so so number one, I just want to say that I agree Kickstarter is not a top 10 trend. It never has been. But that's not the point. It ended up being the launching pad for a bunch of companies that were top 10 trends, like the Oculus, like Pebble with smartwatches. And also, Kickstarter itself is not a mainstream product. Most people don't buy from Kickstarter because you don't trust that you're going to get the stuff. You don't know what it is. And there are a lot of times when you shouldn't trust Kickstarter. Like, we've all gotten those emails that say, I got a cold, it'll be another month. So that is part of Kickstarter, and that's why you have early adopters. And the early adopters are the ones that take the bet, and then they make it happen, and then it becomes a mainstream thing. And so that's what's going to happen in this space. There's so much money going here. There are billions of dollars of market cap already being created in the blockchain. This is not something that is like a little thing on the side for a bunch of nerdy engineers. This is becoming a real thing. We're going to see some huge mainstream applications with currency, multi-currency exchange happening, using Bitcoin as a stored value. And so there are already things happening under our noses in other developing countries that are going to be very big mainstream use cases. And it's only a matter of time. I'm so sure that in the next 5 years this is going to happen.
Okay, time to vote. An ICO-funded startup will have IPO prospects.
Good place to invest.
Mike is going to invest.
Hey, good signal right there.
Contrarians. Yes.
Very contrarian.
Okay. Quentin?
My turn? Okay.
Number
Well,
5.
I want to take a moment to thank Karen for arranging this, because while Mike got engineers gone wild and talking to your Google Home, I got everybody gets smarter and they're not dead. And continuing that trend, everybody's going to be fat. This is great. 7 billion people on the planet, a high cost of some foods like beef and indoor farming. New plant-based foods are emerging and succeeding. Scalability and not adoption is the key 5-year test to this becoming a big deal. Hans, talk about that.
Sure. Now we have 7 billion people on this planet. By 2050, the number will go to 10 billion, if not more. And out of that, potentially 2/3 of that will be living in cities, thanks to urbanization trends in China, India, Indonesia, throughout Latin America. And that's one set of data that grabbed our attention. How do you solve problems like that on a massive scale? The second set of data that grabbed our attention is that China, with GDP per capita rising, consume, and that's both in terms of food as well as in feedstock, more grains are consuming in China it is in the U.S. That's not hard to see. But given that China has 4x the population and with GDP per capita rising, that gap will continue to grow and China will consume more. So the worry in some of the circle in Beijing is that will China continue to be self-sufficient in terms of food production? And given that China has less arable land than it is in the U.S., and a lot of other emerging markets have less arable land than it is in the U.S., which is obviously very blessed for having that kind of open space, you need to find alternative ways to solve that problem. And we looked at, farming on rooftop and funky stuff like that people are trying to do on their own, and just not very scalable. I think over the last 5 years, we've seen the cost of LED light gone down dramatically from $40, $50 a light bulb to now less than 10. You see the brightness factor increase 4x in that process as well. So with a lot of innovation happening, it's now possible to produce food, starting with vegetables and potentially fruits, indoor. And the harvest time is a lot quicker. You can harvest in 20 days versus few months. And that improved cost of production go down dramatically. And the volume could go up dramatically as well in the process. So we think that with breakthrough happening in the next 5 years, that will be able to help to sustain our lifestyle on this planet, and this will play a huge, huge part.
You hear things like this and you become a wonderful optimist. And
you
then
have to, as a VC.
And then they hold up their paddles. Working? People liking this.
Yeah.
People liking this. But I still need you to push back a little bit. What do you got?
Yeah, so I actually I came from a farm actually in the Midwest. Very, very. I've looked a lot at agriculture, sustainable agriculture out here. It was about 2 years ago that I already saw a startup that basically had a semi-trailer and they'd park it in a restaurant parking lot, and they could grow lettuce in less than a week because of the whole idea with the lights and how fast it turned. So I think the thing is here is just timing. So in terms of the technology being there, it's there. It's absolutely there. Now, in terms of the rollout of how fast countries like China and others get that technology is really the horizon, right? Now, the plague will help with the...
That's a given. That's one thing we know.
Reduce the food.
So collaborative.
Hans, you're right. You do have to be an optimist.
You produce more or you have to produce less?
You produce less. And so anyway, I agree with the trend. I think it's here. And we've seen a couple of startups in this space which already I think are just phenomenal in terms of the ability to deliver food. And the question is how fast are these countries like China and India going to get access to that?
Yeah, I mean, just to build on that, I think we've looked at some of the same startups doing this and absolutely believe in the trend. I think the timing is a big question because when I did the math on the current economics of, buying the steel, paying for the light, paying for the cooling, the HVAC, everything, it takes 4+ years to pay back the CapEx.
That's what the problem is. The marijuana is a much higher.
Which helps.
You're right.
We've seen those too.
Which helps, just like opium did before. It helps.
Opium, there you go. What are you going to grow if you have the semi-trailer?
Marijuana is like the new porn.
There you are.
So, I think there's the question is, porn was the early adopter of every technology.
That's
so
right.
now, marijuana
even
will be
Bitcoin.
that way too.
So
yes.
don't just marijuana. It'll play a huge role.
Just the question, I think you might get this at the very tail end of the 5 years when the economics actually make sense because it's just really hard to compete against the sun.
Yeah. Yeah, well, even though they have really good UV lights for that. But I've also met with a few of these, invested in one, toured the MIT research going on in this. And I think Rebecca was spot on in that the indoor farming thing really works well for arugula and lettuce and basil and spices and a variety of specialty plants in urban environments close to high-end restaurants. And it's roughly an acre of land equivalent to one of these containers, these shipping containers, as they're done. The problem, I think, with this in a 5-year time frame, the way maybe it was a little bit overreaching to say it's going to revolutionize globally, is that some of these plant products and some of these locally sourced stuff will happen, but beef, for example, that's a whole other synthetic, initiative that's not going to, unfortunately, play out in this time frame because of cost, right? So when you get to the majority of food, the majority of calories consumed, this just isn't going to make a dent. I mean, when you look at 1 acre per container and then just look at the world at large and then take any cow, multiply by 25x how many acres of land it took to support that cow, it just isn't going to make a dent in global production, I think, in 5 years, unfortunately. Even though it is important that we have revolution going on in food, we're just going to see the beginning indications that there's some stuff going on in plants.
I think the area that we haven't spoken about is not just the consumption. I'm sorry, not just the production, but on the consumption side. So you made a point that Hans, that you want to kind of keep at the same consumption that we're at, and I kind of wonder if that is really not the right part of this equation, in the sense that it's only in the last couple hundred years we've been able to sit at tables like this and consume as much as we want at such a broad spectrum. And then you combine that with the continued research that would indicate that the lower calorie diet tends to lead to longevity in terms of living. And I kind of wonder if this particular problem is a combination of advances in these technologies, but also reevaluating just how we actually deal with diet ourselves. Much like we deal with, in my opinion, like the cold, where up until 150 years ago, we were cold most of the time. Now we want our thermostat set at 70 degrees, and we've kind of adopted to that, which is one of the reasons why we have less brown fat in our body.
Yeah. I think when we first started looking at this category a couple years ago, we had similar doubts whether it would make a difference or not. But at the end of the day, what we realized is that in terms of just taking vegetables, growing vegetables, they just it's over here. You can buy stuff that's organic. Go to Whole Food and get organic stuff. But elsewhere, there's not enough field that can produce that's clean enough to produce organic food. So how to deal with food safety issues, even starting with vegetables. We look around for solutions, and given the extent of pollution in emerging markets, we go back to looking at indoor farming as the best way to solve that problem. And we think that marijuana, I actually don't make light of it. Actually, that will I think will play a role in speed up
the technology.
Exactly, and to give you scale. You need scale, and if cloud helps give you scale, hallelujah, that will play a role. And I think that technology is not just in the U.S., but we see that technology happening in other parts of the world, whether it's China or India. So I think that even where we are in the first world, we don't see that as a bigger problem, or don't feel the need to solve that problem. But in emerging markets, we definitely see that's interesting, and that's why we're so excited about it.
Okay, so technology is there. Can it scale? Can Hans deploy this across the planet within 5 years?
Oh, yeah.
There you are. Look at
Lots
that.
of people liking that idea.
We want you to be right.
As we will with yours.
I think Rebecca got it with The Plague Will Help. That kind of swung over the 20%. That and the weed comment, Okay. Good. Mike.
Okay, trend 6 is Mike's. Rise of DNA applications due to low-cost sequence.
Ding.
The radical decrease of the cost of genomic sequencing will enable superior diagnostic tools that will trigger a dramatic shift to proactive from reactive medical treatments, improving patient care and reducing healthcare costs. Mike?
So 10 years ago, it cost over $100,000 to sequence the genome. And you fast forward today, it's now a couple $100 to actually sequence a genome. Now, that's a phenomenal advancement. Now, it's interesting. I was just thinking 20 years ago, I was working on a PhD in this space. And back then, we thought things like introns in your DNA didn't mean anything. And now it turns out 20 years later, all the things I was taught were basically effectively wrong. But with this advancement of this kind of low-cost sequencing, we are now moving into an era to ask them these questions, understand where should be scenarios that a patient should get additional testing. Okay, so this is not about a 5-year time frame of FDA approval. It's you have a particular mutation, as an example today, that might predispose you to breast cancer and ovarian cancer, something that's very actionable that you can go do. That's here today. So let's talk about the next 5 years. What is that actually going to translate into? I think that one of the areas is going to be in the microbiome, less, let's say, for a pharmacological compound that has some high degree of efficacy, but more of, based on this trend of the bacteria let's say, in your excrement, should there be a modification of your diet? And I think it may be early to start thinking about something along the lines of a smart toilet, but I think that we absolutely will have that as a way to give us indication to potentially get further diagnostics from our MD. I think another area that we're going to see, that we're kind of seeing very emerging areas, is around aging. And understanding that as you age, your telomeres are actually shrinking. How can we actually use this low-cost sequencing to start to understand what might be the approaches that we might want to take to actually elongate that? Will we have a solution for aging in 5 years? No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is this is actually going to enable a new set of applications that can be built to basically drive experimentation a whole level actually higher. So that's it.
Aled?
Start the conversation. Let's raise our paddles.
Awesome. I love this.
Oh, wow.
3 heavies and a ready.
Okay.
A lot of glass stuff for old people here.
Slipping?
Yeah, I might go
right?
red. Yeah.
I'd love to hear how it's controversial because we actually already have low-cost sequencing.
No, that's obvious. Yes.
Yeah.
But yes.
Hans, let's start that.
Sure. I kind of think that Mike took the easy way out. I think that directionally, it's definitely true. There's no doubt about that. But not taking a stance on how long it would take is a little bit, 5 years, I think it's hard, just given the regulatory nature of the category. But long-term, directionally makes sense.
Can I go next?
Rebecca?
I mean, so the low-cost sequencing is, I've been in healthcare IT since 2009, right? I've looked at all the DNA companies. That's obvious. The problem is reducing healthcare costs. And the thing is it's not your DNA, it's not your genomic sequence, it's going to bring down healthcare costs. 80% of healthcare costs can be addressed because people need to lose 10 to 50 pounds. And that has nothing to do with their DNA. Maybe it has to do with their DNA in terms of like what might they want to do, but usually it's just don't eat the Big Mac and put down the Slurpee. And so for me, it's this is just like at the margin. DNA sequencing is going to help you. Like certain kinds of cancer, like at the margin. But the huge issue America faces with healthcare costs is they just eat too freaking much, and they don't exercise, and they eat the wrong stuff when they do eat.
Yeah. How many people had a full genome sequence? Not 23andMe, but full genome sequence?
No.
Yeah, I have. I also had my gut microbiome, my oral microbiome. It's fascinating what lives in there, but there isn't a single damn thing that came out of it.
Yeah, nothing helped.
And I've been working with Craig Venner for the last decade, and he was the one who sort of first sequenced the human genome and is bringing that cost down, a big driver of that cost down through the partnerships he does with the suppliers. And so I think I agree with what I've been hearing earlier. It's important, but there was just a lot of blah here, like smart toilet and stuff that just really seems like a digression from, like neonatal testing and basically a research tool over the next 5 years where we're going to learn a lot more about biology, but we're probably going to, unfortunately, do it in reactive ways simply because changing human behavior, changing payment systems, changing reimbursement, and changing the FDA aren't going to all happen at the same time. And so on the edge, there's some health-conscious people like ourselves, perhaps, some of us in the room, that will use information to better live our lives. But frankly, losing weight's probably going to do a lot more than anything else.
That picture makes me look like 10 pounds heavier, by the way.
Oh, that's just, these are all age regress, I think. Yeah.
What the hell?
Okay, Sarah, it's your turn.
I think that Rebecca said a lot of the things that I was thinking in my head, which is I agree with a lot of what you described. My concern is that it's actually going to increase healthcare costs, not decrease, just because, yes, the cost of the DNA sequencing itself has decreased dramatically, but then with that becomes all these new things that we can do and spend money on that are going to be expensive. So that would be my concern.
Mike, what do you think?
Sure, I actually can rebut Steve's comment. So 8 years ago, my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. And if she had basically a 23andMe test, she would have known that despite her not having any family history, she would have had the CHEK2 mutation, and she would have known. Instead, she just fortuitously, a radiologist found a spot in a mammogram, which was done at 37 because she had a miscarriage. So it was totally random. So despite the mishmash, it's a real thing. It impacts real lives. Now, I agree that 40% of healthcare costs, if you step back, is type 2 diabetes. Absolutely. That is a huge thing. But there are certain people that are actually predisposed to high insulin production, and I think that's actually where we can lead to better actually impact across the country and, frankly, across the world.
Yeah. Okay. Time to vote. Rise of DNA applications due to low-cost sequence.
So now I can't invest.
May disappoint you, Mike, but
I know I can't
people are
invest.
agreeing with
Oh,
you.
man.
Okay, settled in.
Almost a flip side of the other one. Okay. Next up, Steve Gerbison with the Deep Edge. Embedding inference edges, neural nets, tiny brains and everything. There already are some tiny brains up here. Couple local intelligence with each sensor and Internet of Things to become a sensory cortex of the planet. Steve?
Sure, thank you.
Go.
So in 2013, when I was on this stage, I gave what I thought was my favorite trend that I've ever done in these things, and that was this machine learning thing, which at the time, deep learning, machine learning, was fairly nascent, and I really think it's become important. I've been continuing to invest in it and follow up on it ever since. And what I'm trying to share today is something new and different that I think is the next phase of this, and that is pushing intelligence out to the edge. And by the edge, we mean all the devices that are out there. The edge is your car, it's your appliances, it's your Fitbit, it's, of course, drones and robots, and all those things out there that are connected to the Internet. And you hear about the Internet of Things by a lot of people who don't really know what it is, just the Internet of Things, because they know what's coming, but they can't really describe why. Well, this is the thing that's going to make it happen. That is, putting a little brain in each one of those sensors adjacent to it. They have to be cheap, right? Like 40 cents or less, but they're going to be everywhere. So the perspective I'm sharing comes from the chip companies we've invested since that 2013 prediction. Companies like Nirvana and Movidius, both bought by Intel, and most recently my newest investment, Mythic, which is doing an analog chip in a really interesting way to dramatically lower the cost and power consumption of these little brains that you can put anywhere. Basically, little neural networks, little deep learning engines. There's many terms for the same thing. So this Internet of Things, everyone thinks it's going to be big, right? 30 billion devices connected to the Internet just in the next 3 years, and somewhere between $2 and $14 trillion of economic value just in that, making it much larger than the smartphone industry. So it's a big thing, and this, I think, is the thing that's going to enable that big thing. In fact, NVIDIA's CEO says that there'll be trillions of these devices connected to the Internet, and he's not going to be in that business because these are, again, chips that are much smaller than anything NVIDIA makes. Now, Cisco themselves estimate that of the data from these devices that comes back to the data center in any way, there's 270 times as much data that's going to stay local and be processed local. So think of a video camera. It doesn't send all the video up. It has an intelligent algorithm looking for faces, looking for your face, looking for something that's not your face before it sends that drop cam data up to the Internet. It gives you privacy, gives you better latency, gives you better security, gives you much lower cost, much better bandwidth utilization. In fact, if it weren't for these smart brains out at the edge, the Internet would collapse under the weight of all this IoT traffic. So it's an essential thing. But it wasn't possible until now with these new cheap neural networks. The other thing that it also enables is the AI in any device. Imagine your fitness band or your device becomes a fitness coach. Your fridge becomes a health monitor. All these security cameras become a smart security system or built-in building inspectors. Your self-driving car has to have this, right? You're not going to rely on the cloud to make a last-minute decision on what you're doing. Those neural nets have to run locally. And in a sense, it's like we are recapitulating our own biology. We have a sensory cortex and reflexes. We only share the subset of that information to our frontal lobe to make strategic decisions. That's what the Internet and computing fabric of the future will look like as well.
Okay. So, little brains everywhere or the Internet collapses. Rebecca, I'm going to steal from you. The plague will take care of that.
I was going to say, it's like the plague.
Okay, paddles up. Bit of both. Yes, no. Take it away, Mike.
Sure. So I actually certainly do believe in this. Many of this is actually occurring today. The inherent challenge with this that I don't think you answered, and I think a lot of academics push off, is the training data. There's a lot of great academic papers in the area. Academics tend to use incredibly high-fidelity, cleansed data, but that is not the real world. And so the question I have within this general trend is how are models going to be generated specifically for certain scenarios with the right data, and where's that data actually going to be coming from? Because that's actually a non-trivial issue.
I think the refrigerator just won't open.
Yeah.
No, you do not get it.
No, you cannot get
You've
it.
had enough.
Keep sealed for the plague, right?
Sorry, Dave.
You're done eating today.
I mean, like, the thing I think about here is it's one of these things that makes a lot of sense and sounds great, just like having an internet-connected toaster sounds really great. But then you don't actually need it. And so the thing that I'm just asking myself are, like, what are really going to be the use cases? Like most of these devices that you want on the edge, you want to consume very little power because they're just there to really be kind of transmitting data as opposed to doing anything with the data. And so I just think it's one of those things, like 10 years ago we thought IoT was going to be everything, and that my refrigerator was going to be internet connected, and my toothbrush was going to be internet connected, and everything was going to be internet connected. And then you realize that when it comes to actually making that work and the overhead that comes with it, it just doesn't actually create enough value to be worth the kind of the effort and the upgrade.
Yeah, we've been looking at the IoT sector for a long time. It's just hard to find a lot of productive uses for the data.
Yeah. I mean, even look at the Nest, right? We have one at home, and I literally want to rip it out of the wall and just go back to our old thermostat because somebody, not to be named, will change it on the phone, and you don't know it's happened, and you wake up at 3 a.m. you're like, damn, it's hot in here, and you go, and sure enough, it's been changed, or it's learned that you're awake because you've been gone for a week, and so it changes the temperature, and so it's just sometimes it's just not necessary, and it's just easier to go back to the old way, right?
Okay, Steve, defend the brains of your talking toaster.
Sure. Well, I think the Nest says it's a smart thermostat, but it's pretty dumb. The point is that these things in the past, they needed to be connected to have intelligence. If you can move intelligence to the edge, you're not relying on the internet. You're not relying on that long wait for some answer from the cloud. Take, for example, a hearing aid. Hearing aids with the same intelligence at the edge don't have to be connected to the internet. They could focus on voices just the way your brain does, weed out noise like never before, and do translation on the fly. Kind of like the Babelfish from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is like a great product. If you want to know some of these use cases, just think of anywhere that you're frustrated with a product. Don't you wish it could be smarter? If it was smarter, you wouldn't have that frustration. I would say that the Nest is a symptom, not the answer to the problem. On the data set, I think you're spot on. The data sets are the biggest frustration for a lot of these, and it actually gives an unfair advantage in some ways to a Google or an Apple that has an enormous amount of data, privacy concerns aside, on what you like, how you speak, and what you do, right? So the data sets are abundant in certain companies, and so I'm not saying this is necessarily led entirely by startups, but it is something that you're going to see pervade just about every product. And if it doesn't feel valuable enough, just imagine, again, everything becomes a bit smarter.
Okay. A day within 5 years when the hearing aid can tell you to put down the donut in 3 languages, and you still don't listen. Audience, vote.
Oh.
Well, look at that.
Damn. Jurvetson.
We have a lot of IT people here.
Yeah.
We need to make sure this is of some value.
Oh, is that mine?
No, was that yours?
Oh, no, sorry.
I'm just dropping things left and right.
Okay, there we are. They're all over the stage.
Pretty solid. Mike, go.
Okay. Trend number 8 is Rebecca's. Breaking up is hard to do. President Trump will bring antitrust suits against Amazon, which will lead to significant weakening of online megastores and a rise of direct-to-consumer companies. And Trump won't stop at Amazon.
Awesome.
Rebecca?
So Amazon is an e-commerce titan. It's been compared to an 18th century railroad baron. Its business strategies and its sheer market dominance pose anti-competitive concerns that are going to trip antitrust regulations in the very near future. While it has staggering growth, Amazon barely ekes out a profit and prices below cost to foster its own expansion and eliminate competition. Not only is it in e-commerce, it's in cloud computing, shipping and logistics, hardware manufacturing, film production, and now, most recently, pharmaceuticals and restaurants. Now, this is actually a bipartisan issue. On the political front, Trump has gotten the headlines for trying to bust the Amazon monopoly, but it was actually Hillary who released a detailed antitrust platform voicing concerns about the concentration of powers in a handful of technology companies and calling for more vigorous enforcement of antitrust policies. Now, to be convicted of antitrust, a couple things have to happen. First, you have to prove market power, and then you have to prove harm. So they have to do something bad. Either use the market power for their own, perpetuate their own power, or actually harm consumers. Now, regarding market power, currently Amazon captures nearly 1 in every $2 Americans spend online. So I think that point is moot in terms of the e-commerce market, right? We can argue market power is had. The claims they're doing something bad are varied, and they are as follows. First of all, there's a claim that Amazon engages in predatory pricing. In other words, the claim is it offers items at a lower price or at cost
and offers free shipping to help eliminate competition. I don't know how many of you guys have encountered that, but I have. Second, Amazon controls critical infrastructure that their competition depends upon, think cloud computing or logistics, and they use it to further their advantage. And number three, this is the most powerful antitrust argument, and this is what's being used in Google in the EU right now, whose litigation is continuing, is Amazon has platform privilege. In other words, it uses the platform it has to prioritize its own products and services over those of competitors. So what would happen if Amazon was found guilty of antitrust? At a minimum, its business would be regulated more restrictively. At the other extreme, it could be broken up into a lot of baby Amazons, think the Baby Bells, and different companies. And in either theory, the argument is that it would further competition further. Either way, I absolutely predict under any political regime, whether or not Trump is impeached, which is another argument for another day.
Or plague.
Or plague. Antitrust action against Amazon will happen in the next 5 years, and what is going to be applied to one tech titan will be applied to all.
Ooh. Let's vote.
There we go. Oh, my God. Wow, look at that. Red. Yes!
I can start.
Sure, you want to start?
So number one, I just don't think Russia cares about Amazon.
That is good. Touche.
Good comeback. It's every year for a while.
And we have our line of the night.
Very good.
That wins.
Gotta give him props for that.
Awesome.
And number two, you just killed your own argument with Hillary coming out with it first.
Oh, well,
Like, Trump will never do something after Hillary did it.
he did. It was in her campaign platform, and then he said it.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, but he doesn't. Yeah, he did.
He usually doesn't follow
I'm
her.
still skeptical that he'll do anything.
Hans?
Well, okay, so I love this trend. I think it's political, not tech, but let's put that aside. I think the place where this falls down first is Trump may go all out. He's even tweeted that he has a personal issue with Bezos around this front. But it doesn't mean the Judicial Department's going to take it on. And there have been continuous antitrust action, both in the U.S. with the Authors Guild and in Europe, who was just thrown out a few days ago. And the reason I bring that up is that even if the courts were to do what Trump tells them to, which they don't have a recent history of doing, it doesn't mean they'll win. And if you look at the recent court cases, they haven't. So even though you're a lawyer, so even though there are arguments to be made on both sides, the idea that prices keep coming down is all that they found in both Europe and in American courts with prior challenges in the court system. So now let's imagine it actually goes all the way through both these steps. Trump does it, the court takes it up, and Amazon loses. Breaking up Amazon into a bunch of baby Amazons doesn't feel like the mega shift that we may all think as customers of Amazon, right? If you look at the current data, $5 trillion of U.S. retail, of which Amazon in 2016 is $136 billion. Oh, by the way, Walmart is 3.5 times bigger. So that even if Amazon got broke up into 3.5 companies or 5 companies or 10, I just don't see that this is going to go down in history books as one of the greatest tech trends as opposed to a political debacle.
Mike?
I'm just thinking what's interesting about Amazon as a company is that unlike many companies here in the Valley, the way they're organizationally structured is very autonomous. Jeff's always had this approach of the two pizza boxes. I know from a lot of the folks from my prior teams that they're a little bit frustrated because there's a lot of duplicate kind of efforts at Amazon because of this very distinct structure that Jeff's actually put in place. So even though I don't believe this is going to happen, if it did, it's not obvious to me necessarily that it would even decrease the value of Amazon at all. If anything, it may actually increase it because of how he's built his company over the last 15, 20 years.
I think it's hard for me to be not biased on this because as an e-commerce investor, you believe that all these companies doing e-commerce are interesting and disrupting things for based on meritocracy. But I think that you can argue that our president is easily distracted. It may not keep that as a sort of top of his agenda. But I do note that Amazon is scary. I mean, who remembers Amazon's market cap 10 years ago? It was only $15 billion back in 2007, and it's $400 billion today. Sure, Walmart does more revenue. Costco is incredible, but the market cap of Amazon will eventually catch some politician's eye. What will happen? I don't know.
Yeah.
But it is intriguing.
So as a lawyer, this is a really interesting piece for me, and it has nothing to do with Trump. Actually, if Hillary would have won, this would have been front and center on her agenda. And for the first time, actually, since 1988, they put a whole platform out on the issues around the big tech companies and their consolidation of power. So it would have been a bigger issue under Hillary than Trump. And you can say that it wouldn't make a difference, but Amazon is scared to death. So within Amazon, internal memos are never allowed to say market. It has to say market segment. So they can never say market share within Amazon. They always have to refer to a market segment. Because if they control the market, they might actually have a problem, right? So Amazon is worried. You might not be, but Amazon's worried to pieces about this. And they're waiting to see what's going to happen. So what's happened in antitrust is one thing that's true about antitrust is it's always evolved. If you look at the doctrine under the Sherman Act, it's very different than the doctrine today. And today it's been very narrowly defined under is the consumer price they pay higher? Well, the reason that doctrine exists is they thought it was irrational that a company for a long period of time would price at or below cost because investors would never reward that behavior. Well, what have investors done? They've rewarded that behavior. So the antitrust doctrine in place today never contemplated today's current market reality. And so what Hillary was calling for was addressing that current market reality, shifting the antitrust doctrine away from this focus just on consumer price into what exists today, which is really anti-competitive pricing and platform issues.
Yeah.
Okay. It's time to vote. Antitrust suits will weaken Amazon and give rise to...
we have too many tech people here, not enough people from the rest of the states.
Well, yeah, we just found out that Silicon Valley isn't big on populist outrage. There's a much larger country. Just sort of go beyond Tracy. You'll see what I mean.
I think it was a Russia comment.
But internally, Amazon is worried about it.
Amazon's worried.
For sure.
Yeah.
And would it be different if Russia cared?
Putin, Brown Santa comes to Putin, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure he does.
Okay, number 9, Quentin.
Okay. Biome is back, badder than ever, and full of data and AI and ecology. Sarah, we have millions of organisms living on and around our bodies. We're only starting to understand. In the next 5 years, a startup will emerge that will not only help us understand these ecosystems, but figure out a way to optimize it. Riches galore, total impact. This company has a more than $1 billion outcome. Take it away.
So yeah, this is an area where it's not whether a company will have $1 billion outcome, it's how many. The number of chronic illnesses we face is astonishing. I think you all know the stats. We have obesity, cardiovascular disease, GI problems, mental health problems, metabolic syndrome. These are all growing at never-before-seen rates. And amazingly, what we're discovering is that it's the microorganisms in our gut, our microbiome, that are hugely responsible for our well-being. And indeed, they may actually be a unifying link of all these chronic diseases. For those of you who aren't familiar with microbiome, for every cell in our body, there are 10 microbes, and actually 3 pounds of an average adult human is microbiome. So you don't want to lose weight by killing them because they're actually critical to our health. And indeed, historically, the last several decades, that is, we have been killing them, like both by our antibiotics and our diet, which has been decreasing the diversity in our gut very, very quickly. And what's happened is that in the last few years, there's been a tidal wave of research and evidence showing the causal connections between the microbiome in our gut and our health. And just to give a few examples, actually something that Rebecca touched on is the fecal transplants. We don't really understand exactly how it's working, but what we do know is that 14,000 Americans die every year from a bacteria called C. difficile, and fecal transplants have been shown to be the only cure for that right now. When you have a lean mice and you transfer the microbiota of that lean mice into an obese mice, that obese mouse loses weight and vice versa. Scientists have discovered that our microbiome in our gut actually influences how social we are. There's so much evidence. I was doing this research last night. There are in so many different areas, people are finding causal links between the microbiome that we have in our gut and chronic illnesses. And there's a huge why now here, which is not just precipitated by the scientific discoveries that are happening, but it's also our ability to understand that thanks to lower cost gene sequencing, big data, making like any sense out of this like huge amount of data. I mean, look, this is a lot of biome, a lot of microorganisms in our gut. And then, of course, deep learning and the ability to take that data and create inferences from it of what the outcomes will be based on what that particular mixture of flora is. Big pharma and big food are going to be going after this opportunity. It's going to be huge. These are multi-$100 billion segments on both sides of the table, whether it's prebiotics, probiotics, fecal transplants actually becoming manufactured and mainstream.
Time.
And a new breed of microbiome modulators developed by biotech companies.
Okay, for the literally minded in the audience, Rebecca did not really touch on the fecal transplant the way you're thinking. I had to say it, I'm sorry. Okay, paddles up. Not a lot of buy-in. Mike?
So, I spoke a little bit about this. I certainly believe that with the rise of low-cost DNA sequencing, there will be advances in this area to understand from a diagnostics perspective the relationship between our microbiome and various physiological states. I actually would push back on Sarah's assertion that a lot of the research is actually causal. Most of the research has actually been more correlation than causal. There's been speculation on causal, but we haven't been able to root cause necessarily a particular bacterium or acetobacterium to some particular phenotype or expressed, we'll say, disease. I do think another area that we don't think a lot about in this area that's exciting as well is just how this applies to not just humans, but also, let's say, animals like cows for animal husbandry, and how applications there may actually emerge with the same, frankly, principles that Sarah outlined, but just looking at other mammals and how that might be applied to increase yield for food, as an example.
Steve?
Yeah, so on the sort of, well, this has already happened. So there was a company called Ceres. It's publicly traded. In 2015, it went public, had a $1.9 billion market cap, and it makes a microbiome treatment for treating C. difficile. So exactly this was all the rage in 2015. But it unfortunately just failed in mid-trials in phase 2, I think it was, and so the market cap's now below $1 billion, so maybe it'll come back. But the point is, it's really hard, and all the companies we've seen in this area have had a lot of excitement and a lot of failures, and part of the reason was some of the stuff we were talking earlier. The word microbiome now I think has been up 3 times in 3 different trends. It's an ecosystem. We barely understand what's going on. People are on a giant fishing expedition for how all these different interacting things operate. For example, one of the current theories that's bubbling up as to why all these probiotic and microbiome therapies don't seem to work is that the body's natural phage, the natural viruses that we have, just kill them off. You introduce something foreign in the bacterial domain in your gut, you can get great results in a lab study, in a short-term animal study, but then the phage come and just kill them all off. And so it's kind of like saying I'm going to re-engineer the Amazon rainforest versus I'm just going to try to make a better tree. It's a really big challenge. It's an important one. I just don't think within 5 years we're going to get there, although we'll probably see all kinds of billion-dollar valuations tossed around for people who say they've got the solution.
Rebecca.
So you're saying there's a chance.
So
I'm saying there's a chance. Bingo.
I love the microbiome stuff. I actually have a totally different take on this, and this is that I think the fecal transplants work when you take sort of everything in something to your correlation causation issue, and you put it where you don't want to think about. That has been shown to work. The problem is I don't know if pharma can make a buck on this or not to some extent, because what they're trying to do is just like if you have a food allergy, like if you have a peanut allergy, well, doing like a desensitization works, but you can't patent the peanut, right? And so a lot of kids go around with food allergies that shouldn't because pharma can't make a buck on it, right? And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to look at the poop, right, and figure out what is it in that poop that I can put in a pill and actually not have a naturally occurring compound, right? Make it on my own, I can patent the hell out of it and make a buck. When in reality, you might not be able to. The poop just might be it, and you might not understand what that full cocktail is.
Can't
right?
sell that shit.
Exactly, you can't sell that shit.
They're correlated.
And so I think the problem here is what's scary is this is a really proven treatment for a lot of people who are really incredibly sick. And what kills me is it might be not as widely available because pharma might not be able to make the buck on it that they want to make.
Hans.
Yeah, nothing new to that.
Okay.
Okay, so good feedback. So I think so number one is the kind of pushback that correlation is not causation. And look, so first of all, we always have many more examples of correlations than causations, because it's just a lot. Correlations are there happening already, and then we have to do the hard work to prove the causality. The one thing I learned spending a lot of time in data is that usually when there's a correlation, it's like a big fat finger saying, look for the causation. And we're very early, and that's why this is a 5-year trend, not a now trend. We're going to find more and more examples of these causal links in the next 5 years. There's just so much energy going into the space. And to Steve's feedback about this one company that went public and now failed, I mean, God, we could say that about so many life sciences companies. Should we not invest in oncology anymore because a lot of companies go public to raise money and then it doesn't work and then it fails? That is what happens, and we're just very early. And again, this is a 5-year trend. It's not a now trend.
All right. That sounds good. Time to vote, audience. So, a 5-year data bonanza, a hard problem solved.
Good. Splits are good.
Good. Yeah. Very good.
What?
Whoa! Wow!
I got you.
Good job. Good defense. Come back.
Right.
I'll pay you the checks later.
Thank you, fans.
They're battling it out.
Mike, take it home.
Our final trend is Hans's. Retail stores will become showrooms and VR experiences. Offline retail will continue its steady decline as more customers move to online and towards brands with mass market appeal. Malls will become community service centers, offering everything from daycare to tax services. Hans?
I think this trend and the trend you're talking about shows the swap. Amazon is definitely it's an incredible machine, and this is happening not only in the U.S. but also see e-commerce through Alibaba, our portfolio company in China, doing exactly the same thing in China. And so all these malls, whether it's here or China, are closing. A lot of stores are closing. The only store that's doing well offline is TJ Maxx and Dollar General, stuff that focuses on the really mass market segment. So what happened to all these malls? What will happen to them? Well, Alibaba during the Singles Day last year tried a service called Buy Plus. You can take the smartphone, put a VR headset over it. The users can, about 8 million people who sign up for this. They can, while in China, virtually go to New York, take a taxi, go to Macy's and shop and buy stuff. And it's paid by Alipay. Alibaba hasn't disclosed how much sales being done, but that's an interesting way to play retail sales via VR. We don't know what will happen to all these malls. Most of them will close. But in the spirit of keeping some of the jobs alive in the flyover states, we got to figure out a way to keep them open. So maybe it's community service centers, maybe it's trying other services, but we've got to figure out a way to keep them open because through e-commerce, just a lot of that is being disrupted.
Okay, let's vote. Panel? Okay, Mike, you want to go first?
Sure. So I certainly believe the transition from offline to online, but the data is still the case that 10% of commerce happens online and 90% offline. And I kind of wonder over time, even though I put up green, I agree with the overall trend that we're still social animals. It's only arguing a very small fraction of time we're starting to experience this online world, and yet, again, tens of thousands of years we're used to interacting with people. So I don't think that's going to go away necessarily in one generation. I do think for certain experiences it'll shift, but one of the things that's always fascinating to me is if you go to Stanford Mall or someplace like that, the teens, the kind of millennials are still there. Part of it, I think, is the community that pulls it together. So I agree that all that retail space is going to shift. I'm not too sure what, but I think it's a real trend, that's for sure.
Boy, I could have sworn this was a 1990 trend that I saw at some point. When the internet came and the shopping malls were all going to go, oh, shit, there comes the internet. And if anything, it's been different, but it's just the same story. So what has happened is there's been a lot of shifts in what happens in those real estate malls, right? So you got your Brookstones, your Sharper Images, your Best Buys all suffering because consumer electronics are kind of easy for geeks like us to buy online. And then Clash and Clothes and other things that you want to experience or experience showrooms like Tesla and Apple, they boom. So you basically just have shifts in what goes on in the mall. And you have experiences like theaters and VR coming in. That's all great. So at the end of the day, it just feels like it's a real estate shift question, which the REITs and real estate investors could care a lot about. But I couldn't care less. And I'm not sure if most tech investors looking back from 50 years in the future would say, the way in which the shopping malls changed their real estate allocation really mattered a whole hell of a lot.
But isn't that exactly what he's saying? He's saying that the mall will shift and it'll be more
Yeah, but
services,
my point is, like,
pop-up stores.
Great.
I mean, I was going to ask where the teenagers hang out, right? Because if not at the mall. And to your point, I mean, they're still there to a large extent. And my half was, this is called showrooming, right? There's even a word for it. And and rumor has it that Apple was actually giving people $5 off gift certificates if they go take a picture in the store of whatever they wanted to buy and buy it on Amazon. Not that would further the antitrust conversation at all. but I do think it's happening. I just think it's already sort of in process. And I think the China perspective is really incredible and helpful to have.
I mean, I was read on this because I get that the retailers want this and the malls want this, but I just don't think that consumers want the VR experience or the showrooming. Like, I do think that retail stores will have to evolve and become more like experiences, but I don't think that experience necessarily means teleporting somewhere else. And yeah, it'll be cheap rent, so other things will emerge in those former ghosts of malls. But I just don't know. Just don't know if there's going to be a lot of like energy and enthusiasm in this space, and it's just going to feel more like something that's decaying slowly.
Right. I love Steve's response because in 2003, GGV made one of the first investments in China in a very little company, controversial at the time, called Alibaba. And the valuation back then, it was a very expensive $170 million. And it was not profitable at the time, didn't have Taobao, didn't have Tmall. And then in 2004, a group of Silicon Valley top VCs went to China with Silicon Valley Bank. And looking at China, people just weren't sure how fast internet would take off. And among which e-commerce was one thing that most VCs on that trip think that would not take off in China. And then fast forward to today, Chinese e-commerce market is bigger than in the U.S. In China, actually, malls are closing. And this is in China where you think that people would want to have social experience and go shop in the offline world. Alibaba valuation grew from $5 billion when Yahoo invested in 2005 to now $300 billion, 60x in the last 10 years. And e-commerce percentage of retail is over 15%. And so we saw that happening in China. And I'm a personal investor in both Snapdeal and Flipkart in India, number one, number two in e-commerce. They are fighting against Amazon. And India has a much lower GDP per capita than it is in China, yet e-commerce is growing. So I think it is a trend because we have a global perspective, not only in the U.S., that e-commerce is a trend that's happening around the world because it offers better quality services than offline retail, more SKU, cheaper prices. So we think the threat to a mall is real and need to figure out a way to do with that extra real estate space.
Time to vote, everyone. Retail stores becoming showrooms, VR experiences, and community service centers.
There you go.
Okay.
Are we good?
We're good. Go ahead, Glenn.
Time to add up the final results. And as Poll Everywhere is preparing to reveal our trend winner, and we're going to keep in a little suspense now, let's take a look at the wizard wand that some lucky VC is going to walk off with. Oh, you'll be the only kid on your block with one of those. This is a commissioned item created by the Acme Wand Supply, whose slogan is, "When it's just you and the Prince of Darkness, only Acme will do." I've said that a lot. The handle is fashioned of blue and white celluloid, Churchill blue. The shaft is clearly made of ebony. The accents are sterling silver. The end cap is equipped with a quartz crystal ball to help with future gazing. If you look inside the ball, there is a fire opal underneath. Stunning wand. It's finished with a quartz crystal tip and an engraving that reads, 2017 Churchill Club Trend Wizard. Who's walking away with this wonderful wand? Mike?
Well, let's take a look. Let's see the results. Oh, okay. Here we go.
Deep edge.
There you go.
Deep edge.
Are those numbers right?
Number 1 and number 2 are Steve Jurvetson, and he is going to be able to add this wand to his Wizard's hat collection. And congratulations, Steve.
Way to go.
It's here somewhere. It's in a box, however.
Okay.
Oh, here it is.
Where is it? There you
Oh
are.
my God.
But really, I'd
Look
like.
at that.
Wow, that's legit.
It's fragile. Look how
Okay.
gorgeous that is.
The tip will break. I'm not going to use this for any
Okay, you got a cape, you
transplants.
got a wand. Next year it's a broom and you're out of here.
Wow. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Couldn't happen to a nicer wizard. I want to thank all of our speakers for being such terrific sports. Let's give them a good hand. Keep the paddles as a gift. They double as ping pong paddles. You can use them at the meetings and discreetly agree and disagree with anything. Thank you so much to the audience. Please, before you get up, I want to let you know you can leave your email address on your way out and receive a digital copy of all of these trends for your investment pleasures over the next 5 years, or to hold their feet to the fire in 2022. Well, thank you very much. You've been a wonderful audience. We hope you've learned a lot. I certainly have. Thank you very much, and good night.
Going down.
Yeah.